Oh yeah, there's somebody sitting right there.
Ah, Dan joined. Good. Oh, but we lost Jurgen. No. All right, so I guess we can go and get started. It's about 2 minutes after. So this is the LMAP working group. So if you think you're somewhere else or wanted to be in a different working group, now's the time to run out. All of our presenters today are remote, so we actually don't even need the box today. And actually, Dan Romascano, the co-chair, will be presenting. Well, he'll be co-chairing remotely as well. Can you hear me, Dan? Or can we hear you? I guess is the bigger question. We can't yet. All right, you may still be setting up. So first off,
good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Hi.
We can hear you now.
Great.
Great. So I do need a note taker and a Jabber scribe. Do we have any volunteers? Do you want the Jabber then? Oh, you have no device? Tim, were you able to get in?
You do not need any device for Jabber scribing. You just need to take off IETF.
All right, so if anyone's monitoring Neat Echo, just yell if you see someone ask a question for the mic.
Yeah,
this is a small enough.
It's very useful just to tell who is speaking on the mic because the camera is on Jason.
All right, so is there anyone that's actually in Jabber? All right, well, Dan, if you see somebody, you could, since you're actually in Neat Echo, yell if someone types into Jabber. Okay. All right, so here's the note well. Make sure you've read it, understand it. If you're on Neat Echo, you have to say you've read it and understand it as well. All right, the agenda for today. So, actually, I should do it. Let me do the working group status real quick. So we have we have both the framework and use cases as RFCs that have been published. We have a metric. Actually, we have another RFC that was an IPPM that's supporting LMAP work. The current work items that we're going to discuss today hinge around the information model, the Yang draft discussion, and the RESTConf, but those both are relying on the information model. So the goal today is to hopefully get to the end of our discussion and go to working group last call on the info model at a minimum. Jürgen's going to be has 3 presentations, so he'll be remotely presenting all of these. Anything else? And then we'll see where we end up at the end of this discussion. Is there any agenda bashing? Does anyone want to add anything? Just a note for the working group. Both chairs are now, I don't know, Dan, you can feel free. I'm not sure what Dan is no longer employed by Avaya, so it's not clear whether or not either one of us will be participating in IETF. So I think it's good if we can wrap up the work today, or wrap up the work this year. In my instance, that would be a good thing. We can always add new chairs if there's interest in the working group to move beyond the current work chartered items. But these 3 items on the NQ will satisfy the current charter as it is.
Yeah, in what I am concerned, I am retired. I plan to continue to participate in the IETF work, but participating in meetings will become rather the exceptions than the rule. So, for example, my next meeting probably will be the one in Prague.
Yeah.
So I will continue to support the LMAP work, but probably it will be difficult to participate in meetings. So if this work continues beyond the current charter, if there are new proposals or such, then it would be good to think about at least one extra chair who can participate in meetings on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat for now. The good thing for me is Chicago I should be able to get to fairly easily. So I think between the 2 of us, we can cover Chicago and Prague. So that should get us through the current work items.
Yeah, we look good probably. We look good probably for 2017 because Singapore may also be in my charts. But let's see. Maybe we'll wrap up sooner and there won't be a need to talk too much about it.
We'll have anarchy if it's not done by then. Yeah, seriously. All right.
Well, don't take this as an invitation not to submit new proposals if you have anything in mind.
Very true. All right, so I think we're ready. First up. All right, Jürgen, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, we can hear you.
Apparently. So, good afternoon. So we have a few issues left on the information model. The first one, and we had some discussion about it on the list, was actually raised as part of the Young Doctor's review of the Young data model. And the question that was raised was why the LMAP information model, or the data model, but it also applies to the information model, feels in charge of configuring the device ID. It seems that the device ID is something that isn't really an LMAP scope, so it's not something that's specific to the LMAP infrastructure. It's something that's used by the LMAP infrastructure, but it's not specific to the LMAP infrastructure. And so the question is, why does the LMAP information model talks about configuring the device ID? And so the proposal is to actually remove the configuration of the device ID because it's outside of the LMAP scope. And somehow we haven't settled this finally on the list, so hopefully we can settle it now.
I think Tim will have.
So this is Tim Carey, Nokia. So the device ID, let's step back, right? So the pre-configuration elements, information elements that were in the information model actually was driven from text that's in the framework document that says you're going to need you're going to need to provide a couple things to the agent. You may very well need to provide its ID as well as the device identifier, and that's very explicit in the framework document. In section 3.1 of the information model, which is still in version 12 because I just pulled it down, it talks about the pre-config as being, and I'll quote it, it says the information is the minimal information that needs to be pre-configured to the MA in order for it to be successfully communicate with the controller during the registration process. Some of the pre-configuration information elements are repeated in the configuration information in order to allow the LMAP controller to update the items. Some, not all. So I don't expect the device identifier to be updated, by the way, from the controller. The pre-configuration information also contains some elements that are not under the control of the LMAP framework, such as the device identifier and device security credentials. So it's just an information element that's in the pre-config section that really the controller is not going to have any access to, and the collector, in terms of configuring, and the collector is not going to have any access to, and that's been stated clearly in the information model. The pre-config is not a subset of what the configuration is. In fact, those two elements are two different elements that just so happens to share some configuration elements. And so I don't think the device identifier necessarily needs to be removed. If we do remove it, we got to go fix the framework, probably as an errata, and we need to fix this text documentation in section 3.1. Personally, from a BBF perspective, I would remove it because it actually conflicts with the fact that we have other elements that allow you to configure the device identifier. They call it a customer equipment identifier in the BBF. So it actually makes my chance easier, but it will cause you guys problems in the IETF because you got framework problems and you got the information model problems that this stuff dribbled down through, right? I will say the reason why we do in the BBF, we allow this thing to be modified is because it gives the service providers a chance to change. So a device identifier could be a MAC address. The service provider said, well, I don't want it to be the serial number. I need it to be something else than the serial number because guess what? The serial number between two different vendors, they use the same serial number, right? Or have the same potential for a serial number. So they use their own identifiers. So that's the reason why it was driven down that way, right? Again, if you choose to remove it, we're going to have to do something with the framework document, and we're going to have to figure out what to do with this section 3.1.
So I guess that's what I'm hearing, that you are basically agreeing with Jürgen's proposal with some text twists. By the way, the serial number clash can also be solved by using a vendor identifier. And we have one in the IETF, but that's a BBF problem.
Well, I think there's a concern that I have that maybe we might not have understood, missed a nuance, is that the pre-config is not a subset of the config. That's not a subset of what the config is. And if we're treating that in our data models as a subset of the config, then we probably missed the boat on that particular relationship, because they should be just two separate information elements. And guess what? The pre-config between the controller and the MA and the pre-config between the collector and the MA shouldn't come into any bearing on any of the data models that we're dealing with.
So you're saying if we do what the proposal is, we need to go back and adjust the framework
You would have to go back up and at least fix the framework, because the framework was explicit, which is why it was in the pre-config on the information model, and you'd have to fix the information model. But again, the pre-config has no bearing on, should have no bearing on the data model, unless you're trying to make your data model, your Yang data model, a bootstrap model to the MA. And if it's a bootstrap model for the MA, then yeah, then it does come into play. But it's not going to the collector or the controller.
So I hear that we have agreement to remove it from the MA config, right? So the discussion is about the pre-config.
Oh, so is this in the MA? This is in the MA pre-config. Certainly remove it from the MA config. I don't think you want it in there, Jürgen, for sure. Because the only thing that the framework or the information model talks about it in is the is as part of the pre-config, not as the config.
So now,
Right, so it sounds like we have. Oh, go ahead.
Looking at, I'm speaking as a contributor now, and speaking loud to some extent on the pre-config. So it looks like we have like a couple of options, maybe more than two. One would be to take it out from the pre-config and decide whether we want to amend the framework, which is kind of let's say optional to some extent, because the framework we can actually put a note. Pay attention, we may not be, we are not consistent with the framework here, but the framework is an informational document, and during the work we realized that this is kind of a better solution. And the other one would actually be leaving the pre-config ID inside, maybe with another note that kind of shows that we'd like to, we did it mainly because of consistency with other models in the industry, but we do not necessarily expect for this item to be always in use or to be used too often.
All right, so it sounds like we have agreement to remove it from the MA config.
For sure.
Anyone disagree with that? So then the only question is, do we leave it in the pre-config or not?
Now, speaking as a chair now, I would very much like to try to get out with resolutions here and actually give instructions to Jürgen as editor what to do in the next iteration, which should come very shortly. I believe that he may have one on his machine already, and then if there are really strong opinions about what he has done in the revised text, then these opinions be expressed as last call comments. But I would prefer not to leave open issues after this meeting.
I agree. All right, so do we have agreement to remove both then?
I would.
You would push back against it.
Okay, yeah, so I'm just going to push back on that one because it's just, again, I know it needs not to be in the config, but it makes sense to be in the pre-config, and the pre-config doesn't have anything to do with the data model unless you're talking about some type of bootstrapping. I'm just saying, so if you just remove it from the config itself, that's all you have to do to that IM draft, and everything's still consistent with the framework
Yep.
and consistent with the text in the IM draft. That's all I'm saying. Is
Gotcha.
It's
All right.
to me, it's the easiest change, right?
Yeah, that
it
seems-
still makes everything consistent.
All right, so Jürgen, I think you might be the only one. Are you okay with that?
It works in the sense that Tim is right. The Yang data model doesn't model the pre-config. So it explicitly says we don't do this. We only do the config. So the issue that came up in the Yang data model would be resolved by that. That's probably the cheapest path forward. Yeah.
All right, so we'll keep it in the pre-config and remove it from inmate config. Excellent. All right, number 2.
The second issue was about the reporting of the agent ID. Right now, the logic is that there's a flag saying report agent ID if you set it to false, but there's no group ID set. It's still sending the agent ID, which is kind of a little bit surprising if you just look at what you intuitively expect, that this Boolean just toggles whether the agent ID is sent or not. And so the proposal was to actually have 2 bits, one saying whether the agent ID is set, another bit saying whether the group ID is set, and to leave it up to the system configuring the agent to select which agent ID or group ID is being sent, or if none, or both.
Do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, the proposal is have the report agent ID bit just control whether the agent ID bit is sent, have the report group ID bit only control whether the group ID is sent, and leave the policy decision to the system that configures the MA.
All right, Tim.
So it's Tim Carey, Nokia. I have no issue with that because it's really going to be the controller that's going to set this stuff anyway. So they should know. Stupid controllers are going to do stupid things. So let them go do them.
Let them be stupid. All right. All right. We have agreement then, Jürgen, on this one.
Okay. And I think that was it for, next steps. So I think the edits are reasonably clear. I can do them relatively quickly. So there will be -13 soon. And I assume that's the one we go to hand over to the chairs for working group last call.
We may have a comment by Barbara. Or no?
Just as a question, there's been some discussion on the list around the reference URI to the registry. I'm wondering if we should have a brief discussion on that issue so that we can close it per Dan's request.
Jürgen, did you have that as an item?
I didn't have that as an item because I thought we had agreement before that we actually moved from, that we changed the label from metric URI to just registry URI or whatever it's called now before. So that's why I made the edit. If we have to revert that, someone has to make a point to revert that.
We need to understand it a bit. I think what I've seen, and Jürgen, correct me if I'm wrong, is what you're saying is that it does not have to be the IANA registry. It could be any registry. Would your expectation still be, though, that it is in the registry format, or would it be in some other format?
So the value of this object is a URI. So the URI can point to pretty much anything. The metrics registry that's done in IPPM is about metrics. So it's about anything that you can measure. However, LMAP has a number of tasks that don't do any measurement. They do reporting, they do things like that. So they naturally fall outside of the scope of the metrics registry. And
but does it make...
If you want to have an identifier for these tasks as well, it makes sense to be able to point to wherever there's a registry for these kind of tasks.
I'm wondering if it might make sense that if it's something that doesn't fit into a registry format per the IPPM registry format, then maybe it's not too useful to have a URI, so maybe the URI gets left blank in that case. But I think it would be useful if there were a stipulation that this particular URI pointed to something in the registry format. Would that be okay? No? Okay. Tim has a comment.
So this is Tim Carey, Nokia. I'm kind of with Jürgen on this one in that this URI for this task, or this set of URIs that you have for this task, are really pointers to definitions of what you want that task to do. And Jürgen's absolutely correct. Sometimes, since we've moved everything from a task to a tasking model, tasking event model, you're going to want to do things that aren't IPPM related. You're going to want to do housekeeping. You're going to want to do stuff. Even in the BBF, we use that same parameter to point to the BBF registry, which is an IPPM when we do our TR 143 test. Yes, but it's in the format. So that would mean that you would have to then put all your housekeeping tasks in the same format for IPPM.
I mean, do you need to describe them?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
No.
I'm away from the microphone. My question to Tim was, do you actually need to describe, to have some place, where there's a URI where you're describing your housekeeping tasks?
Yeah, you're going to have to, yes. So that would mean that if you're going to not put it in the IPPM format, and even if you do, you're going to have a repository for your registry, because you got to point somewhere, right? And it's got to be in some format that's well known, right? And that's okay. You can have that as part of what you point to. But yeah, so I guess the question, Jürgen, is that for those things that aren't directly related to the IPPM tasks, what were you thinking about, like your housekeeping tasks? How were you thinking about defining those? Were they always in the same format that the IPPM format is in?
So personally, I would expect this to be likely different, or a subset, but it's difficult to say. I think the IPPM metrics registry format isn't really final yet, or, well, I didn't follow the IPPM session. But whatever, I think there's a number of things in the IPPM metrics format that definitely aren't needed. And there might be things that are needed for other tasks that aren't in the IPPM metrics registry. But for the information model, I think we're fine if we have this pointer, and my preference would be to get the information model done with a pointer that can be extended and clarified later on, because it's a pretty generic pointer.
So Marcelo Bagnullo here. So as far as I understand, I think with the current information model, I think this supports everything we need. So what I understand is you will have at least 3 types of different registries that you will need for this to work. You will need the metrics registry. You probably need like the public metric registry. You probably need something like a private registry that the operator or whoever is running this maintains for whatever they want to measure that it's not in the public registry. And you probably need something that it's like LMAP operations type of registry that are tasks that you want to do that are not really related to measuring anything. I understand that basically what the current scope is, the current approach is each of these registries will have their own URI type of naming. Hence, when you include a task, you can include it. If you start with the URI of the performance metric registry, then you will go to those. Then the private one should get their own URI, and the LMAP one, probably there will be one specified in the LMAP protocol specification. So is that what you have in mind, Jürgen?
Well, the information model just has a URI. It always had a URI pointer. It still has a URI pointer. We just changed the name that it doesn't say metrics registry. It just says registry. That's really the technical change in the information model, and I think that's what we want. If there are additional well-known registry formats and when and where they are going to be defined, I really don't know, but that's something for the future to sort out.
Right. That, I mean, the question, I think the real question, because you can envision other ways of doing this, right? You can actually envision that there will be a single LMAP registry that actually then contains sub-registries that contain the performance registry, for instance, or you can make out all different kinds of structures of these registries. But I think the current information model support any of those, right? Because it's general enough to support any of those. So from the information model, I think that's fine. Probably this will deserve more discussion on the protocol itself. I think that would be my take.
So it sounds like we have no dissenters with leaving it as proposed.
Now, leave it as
You're good?
it's in draft 12, right?
As in draft 12, right? What's written there? All right. Excellent. So you have marching orders on the /13, and then we'll move ahead.
Good.
All right, let me bring up the Yang discussion. All right, you're ready to go for Yang.
Okay, so this is about the 3 open issues on the Yang data model. The first one is the device ID. Now, we have settled it on the information model, so the only thing really here is to adopt that solution. So that's, I think, non-controversial. So we go to the next one, second issue. Some objects in the information model are marked as optional because of sensitivity concerns. Now, in principle, in the Yang world, we do have access control models that can actually take care of hiding objects that shouldn't be exposed to whoever is accessing the system. And so one could consider making some of those optional elements actually non-optional in the Yang data model. Thinking a little bit further about it, my proposal is actually to do nothing, because having optional objects is by itself not a problem. And the main reason is that not necessarily all implementations might actually support the access control model that we have. And so having these objects optional might actually simplify certain implementations. So my proposal on this issue is just to do nothing and drop it.
I see no comments at the mic, so it sounds like that's a good idea.
Okay, then we move to the third one. That was raised by Martin during his review. We have a couple of objects that report the current hardware the MA is running on, the firmware it's running on, and the device ID. And these objects overlap with objects that we have already, some of them in RFCs and some of them on the way to become RFCs. So that's in particular the IETF system model has something that overlaps with hardware and firmware, and the IETF hardware model will have something that overlaps with the device ID. And so the question is that Martin raised, shall we remove those overlapping documents? And I think personally that's a good idea. So the proposal is to actually remove the hardware and firmware leaves from the LMAP data model and instead add text somewhere that says those objects can be found in RFC 7317. And for the device ID, do essentially the same and point to the hardware, the IETF hardware model. The only little detail is that the hardware model is still being worked on in the netmod, so that's not yet an RFC, but I checked for all the other objects where we do the same thing, where we say, well, we don't define it here, it's defined over there. All these references are actually informational references, so it would not be a blocking thing that holds off the document. Tim?
So Tim Carey-Nokia, I completely agree. That's exactly the way I did it on the BBF, is that we already had a bunch of this stuff already, and so I just referenced what was already there. I didn't try to duplicate it, Jürgen.
Okay, if nobody is against that, then I will put that into the next revision.
All right, great.
So we get to the summary slide. So I have to make some edits and post another version. Again, edits should be relatively minor at this point in time. I did respond to Martin's review. I didn't hear back from Martin, so I'm not sure whether he had time to look at this or not, but probably once we have 07, it might be reasonable to check with Martin whether he is fine with the changes and so forth, so that we can clear the Yang Doctor review cycle, I think. But I leave that to the chairs to organize, so that's not necessarily my job.
Well, one way to go would be to send the proposals to Martin and ask him if he's happy with the resolution. The other way would be to just make. I personally believe that he shouldn't be. He shouldn't oppose any of the proposals, but it's just my opinion. The other solution would be to go ahead and do the edits, and at last call time send to Martin the ID and let him know, well, this is the last call, and please let us know if you have any problems with proposed solutions. I personally inclined to for the later because it's quicker.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dan, on the later. And Jürgen, are you asking for a few other people to review this document?
Oh, in general, always.
Yep.
Yeah, it would be very nice if people at the last call, if they are happy with what is going on with the content, would just let us know. I have read the document and I don't have any pending problems with it. That's very useful as well because it gives us a feeling about the document having been read and agreed rather than ignored.
So you're going to make this the edits, and then we'll submit it. We'll see what Martin has to say. And if we can have one or two people that are interested in the Yang model to review it, that would be extremely helpful. All right.
Just for my personal information, this is a question to Tim, I guess, and as other folks who are participating in the BBF. Does the BBF have also a Yang model, or do they take any position about the data modeling language that is being used to instantiate the data model?
This is Tim Carey. So from a BBF perspective, we're doing this we use the TR69 protocol with its associated data model. So it has its own data model. I would suspect, and I can't speak for the BBF, but I would think that we would, from my perspective, is that we would use what the IETF has done, because that's generally our the way that we do things is we look to see if there's already modules out there before we invent our own. So the fact that these are here, we probably would use them. We'd probably have to question about the use of RESTconf versus netconf, but but the Yang module certainly.
Thank you. That's very useful.
Is there anyone else in the room that's looking at using the Yang model? I think I don't know if there's anyone actively. Jürgen, you're probably the only one that's got a development in flight that I know of, but I'm sure there's others. All right, on to RESTconf. You there, Jürgen? Oh, we might have lost him for a minute. He is no longer in Meet Echo. Not good. He only has one slide, too. All right. Down to one slide left. Let me see if he emailed. Well, if he doesn't join back in the next minute or two, we'll have to take this one to the list.
Was there an issue on it?
What's that?
Was there an issue on the rest of the slide?
Yeah, I'll put the slide up. We'll present for him.
Yeah, I think this one's just ready to roll, right?
So this is just a response to your feedback, Tim?
No. Dan.
Oh, this is from Dan. Dan, all right.
Yeah. Alyssa Cooper. So sections 5 and 6 of this document are like placeholders, so it's not ready to roll.
Yeah.
And then there's also this issue that has been raised about the registry URIs, which I gather would need to be covered here.
Yeah.
So I agree with this, that it's not ready.
All right.
Jürgen seems to be back.
Welcome back, Jürgen. I think we just covered your slide for you, though. But it's there for you to, and we have time if you want to give us a brief overview. Or a verbose one. Dan was there. Hey, Dan, you're still there, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Are you?
He's back on the participants list, but I'm not sure if he can.
Hello.
Right.
Yeah, he's
There you
here.
go.
I'm sorry. It's early in the morning here, and apparently they have a maintenance window of the IT infrastructure here, right on Thursday morning.
No.
So, but you covered my slides. So essentially, there was no update. The good news is that some of the depending documents are getting stable. And so my proposal is to focus on this once we have the information model and the young data model handed over to the ISG. Does that work?
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Right. I don't know if you caught Alisa's comment, but a couple of sections are right now placeholders, and they need to be filled in with content, and that's part of the plan ahead.
Yes.
It'll just have to be put into a waiting queue. All right. Any other comments on the RESTConf doc? Okie doke. So that was the last presentation. We definitely have time if anyone wants to bring anything else up. That's good. Hey, Jürgen, how long do you think it would take to update the information model and Yang model docs and then get them submitted?
My plan is to do this really quickly. That means this week.
That would be great. All right. Dan, did you want to offer anything else, or are you good?
No, I'm fine, and thank you, and thanks to also to the MeetEcho team, because MeetEcho actually worked very well. Even co-chairing was possible, and of course, having the other co-chair in the room is kind of mandatory. But you can make your points and help even remotely. That's good.
Yeah, I agree. The media echo has come a long way over just the last year. All right. Well, I think that concludes our meeting today. Thank you for helping make progress, and sounds like we're getting very close to completion here. And with that, I guess you have some extra time to prepare for the next meeting. Thanks, Jürgen. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Bye. Good day.
Bye.
Yep. Does anybody need to sign? I think there's at least 3 or 4 people that do.
I'm pretty sure I'm not there. That's okay. I'm, all over the minutes.